What I got here is an R9 280X I was able to pick up in my local used marketplace for just $30 Canadian, which is around $25 USD, I think, on top of my head, but I'm not sure. And in my opinion, this is one of the best budget graphics cards to get in 2023. Wow. So without further delay, let's cue the intro and let's get to the video. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the most underrated PC building YouTube channel. And what I have here is an R9 280X 3GB card that I got off Facebook Marketplace for just $30. Just a quick note that this R9 280X is actually just a refresh HD 7970, so the boost clock is only up to 925 instead of the advertised 1000 MHz, which in reality doesn't really make much of a performance difference since the HD 7970 and R9 280X are basically supposed to be the same card. Anyways, this card has 3GB of GDDR5 memory and has a TDP of 250 watts, which means you need at least a 500 to 550 watt power supply in order to run this graphics card. For those of you out there that only knows about NVIDIA, it performs around the same as a GTX 1050 Ti, GTX 770, GTX 680, GTX 960, and the GTX 1650. Or on AMD side, around a RX 560 and the RX 6400. While this card got the performance, driver support for the R9 series and below has been dropped by AMD, which means it won't be able to run some of the modern day titles without a modded driver, which is where Nime's driver comes in. And in this video, I'll be showing you guys the performance difference between the Nime's driver and the official drivers, and why not you should install the third-party drivers. So with that being said, let's show you guys the system I'll be using to test this graphics card. This is an all black and white themed gaming PC that I built for just 640 Canadian dollars, which I'll be selling locally with the GTX 1070 for 850 Canadian dollars. Everything in this computer is brand new with the exception of the motherboard and of course the GPU. This PC has a Ryzen 5 5500, which is 6 cores and 12 threads, and it's more than enough to run the R9 280X without any bottlenecks. This PC also got 16GB of 3600 CL 18 MHz DDR4 memory and 1TB NVMe drive, all slotted in onto a B350 PC made MSI motherboard. To power the system, there is a Ares Game AGW 600W 80+ bronze unit inside. And that's about it for the important specs for this video. But after this video, I'll be listing this PC for sale locally. So how this is gonna work is that I'll put up a side-by-side comparison on screen and kind of just talk over what I did to get these results. And so on the screen right now, on the right is the modded driver and on the left is the non-modded driver, and as you can see, I have MSI Afterburner pulled up to show you that it is two different versions of the drivers. First up, I tested 3D Mark Firestrike on both of them, and the results are actually pretty underwhelming because on the legacy drivers it got 8545 comparing to the 8555 on the modded drivers. Even though it's 10 points off, I guess an improvement is still an improvement, although it could just be margin of error. Next up, I tested GTA 5 at ultra settings with only effects AA turned on. For the legacy drivers, I got an average of 58 FPS, and for the modded drivers, I got an average of 56 FPS. And I did go back and test it multiple times, and the results for the modded drivers are always 1 or 2 FPS lower than the legacy drivers. After that, I tested this game that I started playing recently, which is Warhammer Vermintide 2. Also comment down below if you want to see this in the benchmarking section instead of another game. And on the extreme preset at DX12, I got an average of 31 FPS on both of the drivers. But from the video, you could see that the modded driver actually gives off a little bit less FPS than the legacy drivers, which means that in an actual game scenario, you might be getting a little bit more performance if you just use normal official legacy drivers than the modded ones. Up next, I tested the infamous Cyberpunk 2047 at the low preset, which means that FSR is set to auto mode and not completely disabled. But I mean, if the technology is there available for you to use, why wouldn't you want to activate it, right? And to keep consistency, I just left it at the preset. And that ended up giving me the same average FPS of 31 on modded and non-modded drivers. The next game I tested was Shadow of the Tomb Raider at the medium preset with no anti-aliasing enabled at DX12. I got an average of 39 FPS on both of the drivers. Finally, for the last built-in benchmark game that I tested in this video, it is Borderlands 3 at the medium preset with DirectX 12. And this time, I got a big difference between the two different drivers, which is an average of 40 FPS on the official drivers versus a super low FPS of 29 on the modded drivers. And before you comment anything stupid, I did go back and test it several times but got the same results. Next up, I tested Overwatch 2 at the Ultra preset with FSR disabled and at the 100% resolution. And to keep consistency, I tested on the same map with the same hero going through the same route on a custom match. On the legacy drivers, I got an average of 79 FPS with the 1% low of 69 FPS. On the other hand, the modded drivers was able to give me an average of 77 FPS with a 1% low of 69 FPS. I'm pretty sure it's just margin of error, but the average FPS of past games have the trend of getting a few or more FPS lower on the modded drivers than the legacy drivers. The next game is Apex Legends. I tested at medium to high settings, which means everything that could be medium is set to medium and everything else set to high, except for shadow spot details that is set to low, as well as no dynamic resolution scaling. And that gave me an average of 68 FPS with a 1% low of 44 FPS on the non-modded drivers, comparing to the Nime's drivers, which gave me an average of 67 FPS and a 1% low of 48 FPS. And of course, to keep the consistency, I tested it on the same map in arenas mode, and to be honest, I think it's just margin of error for sure this time because it felt the same while I was playing. Next up, I tested the best crossover game, which is Fortnite at the medium preset at 100% resolution scale. And for some reason, this game doesn't let me select the DirectX 12 option. So I had to use DirectX 11 instead. And they were all tested on the second match of playing for each driver install. With the legacy drivers, I got an average of 47 FPS with a 1% low of 37 FPS. And with the modded drivers, I got an average of 49 FPS with the 1% low of 29 FPS. And of course, to keep consistency, I just made the guy drop at the same place and run towards the same fence. And as you can see from the 1% low of the modded drivers, it definitely felt a little bit laggier while I was playing. Now for the game that actually gave a pretty surprising result, Battlefield 2042. It failed to launch on the legacy drivers comparing to the modded ones, which it launched right away. And with that, I tested it at the low preset with future frame generation enabled, and I was able to get an average of 30 FPS with a 1% low of 18 FPS. This actually surprised me a little bit because Cyberpunk 2047 was able to launch on both of the drivers. But with this result, I can see why people are pretty upset when AMD dropped driver support for this generation of graphics cards. Up next is the free-to-play game that everyone loves, Valorant. And at the max settings, I got an average of 94 FPS and a 1% low of 76 FPS on the non-modded drivers, comparing to the modded drivers, which gave me the same average FPS and 1% low of 74 FPS. Now for the final game, I tested SpiderMan Remastered at the very low preset with no anti-aliasing and no FSR while turning the motion blur to 0. I was able to get an average of 33 FPS and a 1% low of 22 FPS on the non-modded drivers. And on the modded drivers, I was able to get an average of 31 FPS and a 1% low of 17 FPS. Which again could be a margin of error because I swung at different places in the city. But with the given results of other benchmarks, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the drivers causing the lower average FPS.
Just imagine what sort of deviant personality would dress up like that in the first place.
So to conclude the video, I would say that if you want to play modern games that came out after 2021, definitely go ahead and install the modded drivers. But if you're just using this $30 graphics card to play esports titles, it's better to leave the legacy drivers on. And keep another thing in mind, the modded drivers are third party, so the anti-cheating system in some games might ban you, but from what I saw online, nobody has gotten banned, and I didn't get banned either from playing online games with the third party driver, so you should be fine if you do install it. So with that being said, if you liked the video, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't, still give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.